For the Fiji jurisdiction, I will present two cases on money laundering under the jurisdiction of Fiji and under the reporting of the Fiji Institute of Fiji. So the first case that we are going to look at is a case of about conspiracy to defraud and forgery, altering and obtaining on forged documents for the purpose of committing the money laundering offenses. Now, the parties that have been involved in this fraud case involve 6 individuals as well as 1 business entity. The amount involved was 840,000 Fiji. That was the approximate amount that been involved in this case, or it can be converted to around 78 USD. So this money laundering case was actually made possible through the conduct of the workings of the commercial bank, of which the fraudsters involved in. So it's also made possible by the workings of the establishment of one shell company and involvement of certain family members as well as the associates of these family members, and the use of multiple bank accounts and purchase of high value. So these are the type of things that have been involved to make this money laundering case possible. So I just slowly read out the case facts that have been involved. So the main suspect here, his name is actually Mr. Anand Kumar Prasad. He was, at the time of committing the fraud, he was age 27 and was an employee, as he was employed as an accountant at Fiji Fiji Limited, which at that time trading as Total Island Resort. So that resort employed him between 2006 and May 2006 and January 2008. At that time, he fraudulently altered checks that were being issued by the resort for payment of its expenses. So a total of around 84 checks amounting to about 840,000, this figure here. These were fraudulently converted and also deposited into the local commercial banks in Fiji. So Mr. Anand Kumar Prasad, the one who actually the main suspect, he actually first personally recommended by his sister, whose name Shelly Sangita Chan, who was at the time is a bank officer for the owner of this Fiji Limited, or the resort business. And the owner of this business is Richard Evanson at that time. So he actually got a referral of Anand Kumar from his sister, Shelley, who was the banker agent for his business at one of the Fiji's commercial bank in Suva. Sorry, that was the ANZ. So she was a senior prime banker, which means that Richard Everton had a privilege to walking into a bank, and there is a customer and bank relationship. So there is a huge trust between Richard Evanson and the sister of Prasad. So Prasad was given the job of accounted as a result of this reference. So here we talk about Anand Kumar as the main culprit here, assisted by the referral that's done by his sister as the banker for this employer. So she usually provided banking services to Mr. Richard Evanson because the business bank of Spore Limited Total was held at the ANZ Bank. So Mr. Anand Kumar was also a former employee of the ANZ Bank. So he actually, when he got a job as an accountant to Spore Limited, he actually resigned and moved to Spore Limited. So Anand Kumar had direct access to the checkbooks of the resort as an accountant and was aware that checks for less than 10,000 would not be scrutinized by the management of the company. So let me stop here and do a little explanation on this. Now, most corporations and companies, they have actually so careless about funds and money that have been signed off, which is not within the threshold whereby the management has to apply proper scrutiny to the funds that have been paid out. Now, in most of the financial crime, as well as this crime, that this case that we are looking at, most of these funds that have been committed are the ones that are existed below the threshold for management to scrutinize, especially for oversight purposes before signing of checks. So these kind of amounts are normally very, very common to be committed by accountants who committed fraud within organizations. So apart from the money laundering planning, Mr. Anand Kumar Prasad also arranged with his friends to open bank accounts or to use existing accounts as a conduit for the fraudulent altered checks after he arranged the payees' names and increased the sums payable. So with the checks that have been signed for operation as well as for services of the company or the resort, Mr. Anand, as the accountant, planned this with his friends to alter the checks so that they can change the names as well as change the amounts that are now reflected in the check. So the forgery of checks, around 75 of them, total around 680 Fiji dollars, were actually obtained fraudulently by Mr. Anand as the accountant. And out of these checks, they were made payable either to himself or to his brother, Mr. Arun, or his associates, which are named here as Deo, Reno, and Chandra and Singh. So these huge 75 checks that have been forged were actually paid either directly to his account or to these parties. So these checks of the resort were stolen by Mr. Anand Kumar Prasad, and he forged the signature of Mr. Evanson. So that's making these checks possible to be fraudulently checked. And the amounts were ranging between 3 to 10,000. So we can tell that because they are outside of Richard Evanson's scrutiny, they will manage to fraudulently manage the fraudulent activities because of the threshold. Alteration of checks. 9 checks that were written by the resort for the payment of general services were altered to the value of $152,080 So these checks were deposited into the business bank account of Sohil Grocery and Machinery Repairs. Now this company is actually a company owned by Mr. Singh. Now Mr. Singh is actually the owner of the company, and this company behaves as the shell company to facilitate the alteration of these checks. And Dio probably, as the owner of this company, probably have a good collusion between him as well as Anand, the accountant, because he himself was the former mechanic for the Spore Limited. So in a diagrammatical order of what's been explained, it was something like this. Mention Singh here and mention the accountant here. So seeing that Mr. Deo, sole trader of this company here, colluded with this one and around 552,000 through forgery checks that have been deposited into this. But as the case said, some funds are deposited into this company owned by this former mechanic as well as a colluded associate of Anand. But however, some checks that have been fraudulently altered have been deposited into their respective personal accounts. And not only this, you have other associates here who are part of this scam. They also receive checks as well as cash that have been deposited into their personal accounts. So in all, it's not really a complicated money laundering or financial crime incidents. It is just because it was investigated and put forth for the public to and the courts to see. But if you look at it, it's not a complicated money laundering compared to the cases that I've discussed for the international money laundering cases that I've covered. So if we look at these cases, they are quite easy. Now, one of the lessons for this investigation was that doing an investigation, if you close your eyes and then you focus on this particular accountant without looking broadly on other associates, you will probably not catch this arrow here, or you will not catch this one here. You will probably an issue with these two, and then you will probably focus on these two. But this is a very well investigative case that have been, at least it's spread to catching these culprits who are actually not part of this diagram directly, but indirectly, but they are also beneficiaries of the fraudulent checks that have been paid out by this company to it. So it was actually a good investigation, which actually involved this more than 6 persons and 1 entity. Now look at it from perspective of the criminal proceeds that were credited to the respective commercial bank accounts were withdrawn immediately for similar credit values. So these withdrawals were made in the form of cash and bank checks. To actually, within the 6 people, they purchased 6 motor vehicles as well as a residential property. So these are the things they actually bought. So out from this financial crime that's been committed from 2006 to 2008, it's involved 1 Toyota motor vehicle, and also 1 Toyota Hilux, another Toyota Hilux, as well as a CRV motor vehicle, as well as a Nissan Sunny, and a Toyota Corolla motor, as well as some funds that have been remain into the accounts of these 2 brothers, which were amounting to around 5,191 Fiji dollars, as well as a real property of around 142,000. Which was subsequently registered under the accountant's friend. So, if we look at from this perspective, we must acknowledge the fact that this investigation was actually a very good investigation. So, on 10 September 2010, the DPP's office successfully obtained a civil forfeiture, which actually forfeiture of all these properties that have been mentioned here. So on 15 April 2011, the court proceedings in the High Court of Fiji for a criminal case of Mr. Anand Kumar Prasad and others. On 10 September 2010, the DPP's Office of Fiji, they successfully obtained a civil forfeiture, non-conviction based order on the above mentioned tainted property that was just referred above, which also involved as part of the acquisitions out from these fraudulent funds. On 15 April 2011, the court proceedings in the High Court of Fiji for the criminal case of Mr. Anand Kumar Prasad and others, they commenced at the time. On 19 April 2011, Mr. Anand Kumar Prasad, his sister, Mrs. Shelley, the bank officer, 2 brothers by the name of Reno Prasad as well as Reno Chandra, and their associate, Mr. Dio Narayan Singh, and his wife, Ms. Atisha Kiri Singh, were convicted for conspiracy to defraud, forgery, and obtaining on false documents and money laundering. So, before we finish off this case, all these individuals were handed down with at least 4 to 6 years of imprisonment. But what is important for this case was the criminal financial crime that have been conducted for this case. Now, if we look at fraudulent activities relating to checks, that those types of financial crime incidences, they were not so difficult to investigate, although the Fiji jurisdiction, it took them around 3 years to investigate, which is to get hold of other associates that have been involved in this case. But I think what is important in this case, like a fraud cases that actually occurred below the threshold and forgery, they are kind of easy cases to tackle. So it is a kind of situation that is not difficult for investigators if they have the power and if they have the human resources to do it. Otherwise, it will remain as in other jurisdictions that such easy cases like this will never be prosecuted. This second case was made possible by one unemployed Fijian who registered the Fiji Honeymoon Beach Resort money laundering resort company as a money laundering case. Now, this unemployed Fijian registered this business to provide tourism services such as accommodation and other tourism services. The culprit actually colluded with one the tax officer within the tax office, and they both fraudulently converted value-added tax refunds from other businesses into this company. So they forged the checks that were refunded to other value-added tax refunds to make it payable to this Fiji beach resort. So from these, they deposited checks from this collusion from this tax officer within the tax office. They colluded and deposited around 272,220 into the bank account of the shell company, Fiji Honeymoon. So as a result of this suspicious transaction report from the banks, the case actually been surfaced as a result of the activities between February 2004 and August 2005. So this case was actually brought about as a result of the STR, so suspicious transactions report from 3 commercial banks within Fiji, that this individual by the name of Salendra Sen Singh, who actually registered this company as a seller company to handle these fraudulent activities of what's been described. So this company was registered for tax with the Fiji Tax Authority. However, the business had not lodged any value-added returns since its establishment. So an employee within the Fiji Tax Authority colluded with Salendra to defraud the tax authority. So they actually stole and gave Salendra 2 genuine VAT refund checks that were legitimately raised by the Fiji Tax Authority to 2 different taxpayers in June 2005. So this guy altered the payee of the check information, the check leaf, to read in reference to the company that he registered, the Honeymoon Beach Resort Limited, and the amounts on the 2 checks to a total of 272,000. So the fraudulently altered checks were deposited into the bank of this company in August 2005. So on the same day, Salendra deposited the altered checks into the account. He was able to withdraw cash totaling 272,000 and purchase a motor vehicle at the price of 105,000. A freezing order was placed on the balance of funds that remain in the business bank account of this company, the Honeymoon Beach Resort. So the Fiji Tax Authority's business bank account is maintained at the commercial bank too. So while the company, or this shell company, maintain its bank at commercial bank 3. So both of them are banked in 2 different commercial banks. So these funds were actually in a freeze order waiting for clearance. So the predicate offense involved causing payment of money by virtue of forged instrument with the altering of the paying amounts on the 2 checks, and by unlawfully withdrawing the laundered funds. So by October 2010, Salendra was convicted of 2 counts of causing payment of money by virtue of forged instrument and 1 count of money laundering. So he was sentenced to a concurrent term of 2 years for these 2 counts. So the sum of 85,000 that was remained in the business account of the shell company, Honeymoon Beach, was forfeited and ordered by the court to restore to the Fiji Tax Authority. So this also the Fiji police seized printers and photocopiers in Salendra's residence. The equipment was of latest model and was used to print fraudulent VAT refund checks. So these were the certain challenges that made the nature of the case significant. Some factors involved were the high degree of planning behind the fraudulent activity, the large sum of money defrauded, and the non-recovery of substantial amount of money. So this money laundering case was one of the first Fiji Financial Intelligence Unit. At this case, when this case was coming into play, the Fiji Financial Intelligence was just started to set up. So it's kind of a very interesting case because of the issues and the investigative and the processes that have been involved to make this case fraudulent activities occur. But I think one of the saddest part of this case was that the amount that have been misused or have been fraudulently used or abused by these Salendra have not been recovered. So these are kind of difficult and also the saddest challenges surrounding this sort of funds. So another very interesting case in Fiji that was occurred in 2008. This case was referred as 50 million euro case. It's very interesting because a foreigner colluded with a local and they approached a finance company for a loan of 250 Fiji dollars loan. So among the documents that they submitted to this finance company for the application for the loan was a copy of a New Zealand bank draft of 50 million was attached to it. So the bank draft was actually post-dated and was payable to the local company owned by the two individuals. So these two individuals actually own a company. Upon receiving the 50 million euro from these two individuals, the finance company actually referred this 50 million to its bank. And so the bank, commercial bank that looks after this finance company's account referred this 50 million to the Fiji Financial Intelligence Unit for verification. So the FIU in Fiji referred this case to a New Zealand corresponding bank that looks after or the owner of this Fiji million. So it's been verified by the New Zealand corresponding bank that the draft was actually counterfeit. So as a result of the decision from the New Zealand, and while the decision was there, these two were trying to deposit a bank draft into their business account, which was held in one of the commercial banks in Suva. So this is the background of the case. So the result of which was they've been investigated, and then the court case have been conducted on them. So the foreign national and the two locals were charged, convicted, and imprisoned in 2011 for periods ranging from 2.5 years to 3 years for possession of false document, uttering a false document, as well as demanding property on forged document. So these are the offenses that have been caught within this case. So it's a very, very simple case, but in some jurisdictions, they turn a blind eye on such incidences, but this can be a very serious, and we have to acknowledge the fact that the Fiji jurisdiction took up such initiative. Fraud and money laundering case also in Fiji. So this involves accounts officer defrauds the company. So within 1.5 years, between 2006 and 2007, this person C, 28 years old at the time, fraudulently obtained a total of $466,000 from her employer. She was an accounts officer, remember, not an accountant. She's just a below staff within the accounts department and account officer at a local hardware company, and her job description involved raising payments for the company's international transactions. However, person C, this employee, was able to raise local payments for checks between $9,000 and $18,000. These checks were cashed at the bank by this employee. So this employee was convicted of money laundering on the basis that she ought reasonably to know that the proceeds of 472,466 was derived indirectly from the falsification of the company's books of accounts. So these were the offenses. He ought reasonably to know that these proceeds were derived indirectly from the falsification of company books. So this were the crimes that she committed. So she was also convicted of corrupt practices, as she had corruptly offered 10,000 cash to her employer's accountant to induce him to stop investigating the cashing of the suspicious company checks. So because of that, it's also part of the corrupt practices offense. Also, in relation to fraud, there is a value-added tax refund scheme fraud that have been committed. In this case, between March 2008 and September 2010, Mr. Robin Shiam, a 36-year-old tax assessor at FRCA, or the Tax Office of Fiji, approved fraudulently generated tax refunds totaling $350,000. As an assessor at the Inland Revenue Department of the Fiji Tax Office, his work involved assessing various types of income tax returns, checking data input, and approving refunds of income tax to business and personal taxpayers. The police found that Mr. Shiam had forged the supporting documents for some tax refund applications. The police found that Mr. Shiam had forged the supporting documents for some tax refund applications and had removed these documents from the offices of the tax without authority. So it's forged the documents and also removing the application. The police found that Mr. Shiam had forged the supporting documents for the same tax refund applications and had removed the supporting documents from the offices of the tax office without authority. So these were the crimes that this officer committed. So forged and also removed the documents from the office. So the tax refunds were made payable to 9 of Shiam's friends who had provided their bank account details to him. So Mr. Shiam had informed his friends that he was owed money but did not want his wife to know. When the tax refunds were paid to the bank accounts of Mr. Shiam's friend, they withdrew the cash and gave it to him. So these were the crimes that he was. So this is the summary of the simple case that involved Mr. Shiam. It's just about forged existing tax refund of other applications and remove these documents out from the tax office, and also using these refunds money and deposit it into his friends' bank accounts and asked them to and instructed them to withdraw according to his wish. So it's actually occurred, and I don't think this is only happening in Fiji. It's happening in other jurisdictions as well. He was defrauded as inland revenue checks into his bank account. The case was scrutinized by Fiji Intelligence Unit, and it was established that this businessman, along with other individuals, had fraudulently obtained value-added tax refund checks. So it was a fraudulent act that they cooked up the value-added of VAT to get some refund checks from the tax office. So the case was disseminated. They referred the case to the Fiji police for their formal investigations. So in July 2014, Mr. Manoj, the person X, was charged for money laundering offense under Section 69 of the Proceeds of Crime Act. I guess this is 1997 Act. So if we go to 1997 Act, its offenses referred to Section 69 referred to money laundering. So transaction in this section, money laundering offenses for the section transaction includes receiving or making of a gift. So it says that a person shall be taken to engage in money laundering if and only if the person engages directly or indirectly in a transaction that involves money, other property that is proceeds of crime, or the person receives or possesses or conceals, disposes of, or brings into Fiji any money or other property that is proceeds of crime. And the person knows or ought reasonably to know that the money or other property is derived or realized directly or indirectly from same form of unlawful activity. So he was caught under this section. So money laundering offense under Section 69 of the Proceeds of Crime Act. It was established that between January and April 2004, Mr. Maynard submitted 4 VAT returns falsely, containing false information for his company, shipment imports and exports to the Fiji Tax Office. The 4 VAT returns claimed that the VAT he paid on his business purchases were more than the VAT he collected on his sales. So the ones that claims the VAT claims that the VAT returns that he claimed were actually paid for his businesses were more than the VAT that he collected on the sales. So what he attempted to refund was more than what he actually paid for the VAT sales. So Mr. Manoj was issued 4 VAT refund checks totaling 44,000, which he deposited into his personal account. These funds were withdrawn from his bank account and uncovered and recovered. So on 30 July 2014, Mr. Manoj was convicted for money laundering and false pretenses, and on 3 October 2014 was sentenced to 4 years imprisonment. So again, this is a very easy case. By submission of a suspicious transaction by the commercial banks, this case can be quickly investigated. So like I said, in other cases, Fiji can successfully prosecute these sort of cases, and we have difficulties in other jurisdictions. And you know where I come from, there's also difficulty in such jurisdictions. This is a case of a school teacher that has been sentenced to 5 years for money laundering. Again, this is also a very easy case. In 2011, the Fiji Revenue and Customs Authority noticed irregularities in their database and established that in their database, 27 taxpayers were using the same postal address. So, questions of how come 27 taxpayers were using the same database or the same post office box number or box address. So the tax office conducted an investigation into the anomalies and discovered that fraudulent VAT refund transactions out from these taxpayers who've been using the same box address. It was discovered that between 1 February and March 2007, Ms. Savita Singh, the teacher, negotiated a check for 2,400 that was obtained using fraudulent tax return. Mr. Savita Singh was not registered as a taxpayer and therefore was not entitled to receive a tax return. So, although she negotiated for this 2,400, she was not at least a taxpayer and therefore not entitled to receive tax return. So the funds were deposited in her ANZ bank account. Ms. Savita Singh had paid the state the amount of money received as a proceeds of crime. So despite the fact that she already paid the amount back to the state for this proceeds of crime, on 23 September 2015, she was actually convicted of money laundering, and on 19 October 2015, the High Court of Fiji sentenced her to 5 years imprisonment. So this is, again, it's a very easy case to investigate, but we must look at the offices or the people who actually manages or assess the database of the Fiji Tax Office, and so this is actually the red flag. So out from this red flag, this whole anomalies were being found and were being prosecuted. This is a nice, beautiful case from a commercial bank employee, the ANZ Bank. So this employee was caught laundered funds using the ANZ Bank account. So, the bank or banks themselves, they have accounts which hold the customer funds. So within the bank itself, they have what they call a suspense account. Suspense account is kind of account that is doing the clearance of all temporary funds that have been coming in and cleared within the banking system. So from May 2012 to October 2013, Mr. Vikas, while an employee of ANZ Bank, stole funds from the ANZ suspense accounts and convinced ANZ account holders as state parties to allow him to transfer the stolen funds to their accounts and conduct withdrawals for him. So while he transferred the funds from the suspense account within ANZ to his friends, he also asked them to withdraw the funds and return it to him. So within the ANZ itself, they conducted an internal audit checks and revealed discrepancies in the accounts. And after investigation, it was revealed that Mr. Vikas stole and laundered a total of 356,000 from the ANZ Bank. Of the total amount, only 3,370 was recovered, and the bank reversed transactions only to a value of 11,000. So on 21 April 2015, Mr. Vikas was sentenced to 8 years in prison. And after the appeal, they granted him just 5.5 years. So this case is actually within the bank, and from the bank they did the prosecution of this case. It's kind of an easy case, but if the bank's internal and risk audit were not handling the proper checks, they will definitely have chances of missing out to detect this sort of crime.